I was due home Friday night, around 8 o'clock. Dan Wilkins and I had gone to Boston to present our company's products to some big buyers. Things were going pretty well, at least it seemed that way. It would be several weeks before we would get a final response from our customers. Friday morning at 8 a.m., we were notified that our meeting today was canceled and rescheduled for at least a week. Since there was nothing for us to do in Beantown, we headed back to Pa. I had some chores to do around the house, reminding me of which Karen had pecked all over my brain, so I was glad to be home early to get them done. I arrived with Dan, and he dropped me off at my house around 2 p.m. I went and changed into my work clothes and got my tools. A few years ago, we added another bedroom and master bathroom to our house. This allowed us to put our 2 children each in their own room. They weren't home now, but when they were younger, it was pretty bad. We tried to save some money by placing the addition on a subfloor, about a meter high, rather than on a full foundation. I constructed a hatch in the closet in the powder room that allowed me to jump into the subfloor directly from it. I also had a removable panel in the wall in the backyard if I needed to enter or exit the subfloor from the outside. And to open the hatch, I had to close the closet doors almost completely so that the inward opening of both doors would not restrict the opening of the hatch. I gathered what I needed and went down under the bedroom. A meter, that's a fair height, but still hard to move around. I crawled to the pipes leading to the main bathroom with my keys. Noticed that the rat poison I'd left under the bathroom floor was mostly intact. A year ago, I had a problem with red squirrels. I never told Karen, but I bought a shotgun and once spent most of a weekend in the subfloor, hoping to belt a couple of the little bastards like a Wild West sheriff. It was a manly thing to do, and I actually had fun. Karen was at her sister's that weekend, and I must have hit a couple squirrels a few dozen times. Balls were bouncing all over the place. Then I got the idea to put an empty Mountain Dew soda can in the corner and shoot them. After several hours and several hundred shots, I was able to hit the letter D from about 10 feet away. I had become a sniper. I didn't see any squirrels after that. I guess a shooting range is not a place an animal would want to come to often. By the end of the weekend, I got bored with this game, so I poured cement over the hole they were snooping around in and left rat poison. I was under the bathtub trying to remove the rusty drain. It was clogged to the point where water was slowly filling the tub when we showered, and no amount of cleaner could fix the situation. I was going to take the bull by the horns, remove the pipe, and either clean it or replace it. I discovered that I had to skin a few joints first before any serious plumbing work could be done. I was just about done with the initial task when my cursing was interrupted by footsteps. It was too early for Karen to be home, but there was no reason for anyone else to be in my bedroom. I watched her take a shower as I removed the drain pipe and a small flood hit me. I crawled back to the hatch to warn her not to use the bath water. As I reached the hatch, I heard a man's voice. Now that was really weird, and I got a bad feeling. I slowly stood up in the hatch. The upper half of my body was in the closet. I had almost completely closed the restroom door so I couldn't be seen. Karen was completely nonchalantly undressing. At least I thought maybe it was casual, considering Carson Herzog was standing by our bed. I realized that I had to hurry or my faithful wife would no longer have that status. "I love going out with you, Karen." Carson grinned, pulling off his shirt and unbuttoning his pants. That's when I realized I was too late to prevent this dastardly deed. It seemed to be a common occurrence. Karen was naked and laughing as she climbed onto the bed. "You'd better hurry up. We have about an hour. Then I'll need to clean up and get ready for Tim to come home tonight," she warned. "An hour is plenty of time for a couple times." I like to think of myself as a reasonable person, but my anger was building up fast. I blushed and my knees started to shake. This always happens when I'm really worried. "Sounds like you got it right, Carson," Karen grinned. "As long as I have time to clean up, use me however you want. You know I love everything you do to me. I just don't want him to suspect anything. If he found out about us, he'd explode. Besides, I don't want to hurt him." "You little whore." Carson laughed. "Are you that stupid, or do you think I am? If you didn't want to hurt him, you wouldn't be lying naked on this bed with me right now. You don't give a shit about Tim, and neither do I." "That's not true, Carson," Karen protested. "He's a very good husband, father, and provider. I just need a little excitement in my life. I don't want to lose him. I love him." Well, I'm not complaining, he admitted, but I think you have a strange way of loving your man. Oh, that's good, Carson, Karen cooed. I love Tim, aha, but I also love you. I want both. I reached a new level of anger, became very calm. I wondered if maniacs felt the same way before they started killing. Now let's get on with it, for God's sake, Karen begged. As Carson plunged in with my wife, I went down into the subfloor and crawled to the outside exit panel. Walked around the house and saw Carson's SUV parked in the driveway. Karen must have come with him because her car wasn't in the garage or driveway. I grabbed a hammer and a cordless drill and knelt by the rear tire. The drill was already set up, so I drilled a hole in the tire. It hissed for a second, then burst. It took a few seconds to get all 4 tires flat. Drilled out the spare tire on the tailgate, too, just in case. Then I went around the car and smashed every headlight and window in the damn car, and started to feel a little better. My neighbor hides a key on his porch, and I have permission to enter his house if I deem it necessary. I went into his place and dialed Carson's number. I knew him because he and his wife were good friends of ours. Karen worked with Carson, and we were close. Apparently, I never realized how close. I grabbed a towel from the rack by the sink and covered the speakerphone with it. When Dottie answered, I told her I was a neighbor who saw some guy trash her husband's car outside Tim Stewart's house. Then I hung up the phone, walked around my house again, and crawled back into the basement with a hammer and drill. I didn't want to leave a weapon of mass destruction of a machine where it could be found and possibly point a finger at me. I realize now that there was no logic here. Who would be the first suspect? An angry, resentful husband. My car was wrecked in my driveway. I crawled over to the ledge where I kept my shotgun and pulled it out of the sealed plastic bag I used to keep it clean and dry. Our phone rang several times, but I knew Karen was too busy to answer it. The auto-reply recorded something, but I couldn't make out the message left. It must have been Dottie, though. Her next move would be to drive the few blocks to our house. As I crawled up to the hatch, I heard groans and grunts all around. I stood in the closet and surveyed the mise-en-scene through the opening in the bathroom door. Carson and Karen were doing it doggy style, and they were both close to finishing. I was about 10 feet behind him. Somehow I knew I would hit the target as I raised the shotgun. The shot hit his compressed scrotum with a distinctly audible smack. He screamed and lunged forward, reflexively, I think. Karen's head slammed into the headboard with force. Damn, that must have hurt. Still, that pain paled in comparison to the pain Carson felt. As I covered the door in the opening, I could see him jumping, screaming, and clutching his balls. I quickly put the gun back down, crawled outside, put the panel back in place, and walked across the backyard. I kept walking until I got onto a neighborhood street and walked a few blocks to the local pub. I felt like I had earned my way to a few beers. Well, how many guys in the world can shoot so aptly? Sipping a cold Yengling, I imagined the chaos that was going on a few blocks from the hotel. It was about 5 when my cell phone rang. It was Dottie. It was Dottie. "Where are you, Tim?" she asked. "We're driving through Connecticut on 84, I lied. "Why do you ask?" "I'm at Wilson Hospital. Carson is in surgery and Karen is in the emergency room," Dottie replied. "What the hell are you talking about?" I blurted out. I was really surprised. Had they been in a car accident? "No, it's more complicated than that. I really can't tell you much over the phone. They just want to monitor Karen for a few hours to make sure she doesn't go into a coma or something. She has a concussion. I just wanted you to know where she is so you don't panic when you get home." "Thanks, Dottie. I don't usually panic when Karen's not home. I appreciate you calling me. I'll stop by the house to get my car and I'll drive to the hospital. You'll see Carson's car in the driveway. It's all wrecked and the tires are flat. But I think you can drive around it," Dottie said. "Okay, sounds bad though," I told her. "If I have to, I'll take Karen's car." "Her car isn't there, Tim. It's a long story, and I don't want to tell it over the phone. It's just a warning, and I'll talk to you when you get there." I hung up the phone and thought about the situation. I was very upset because I didn't expect them to be admitted to the hospital. I wondered if the chickens would come home to sit with me. As darkness fell, I made my way back home. There were cars stopped near my house and several people wandering around. They were all puzzling over the mess in my driveway. I left the sidewalk, walked through the yards, and entered the house through the back door. I went into the bedroom to change. There seemed to be a riot going on in there. The lamp and table were overturned. Clothes were strewn about, some blood on the carpet. I realized I must have cut a vein in Carson's old ball sack. I grinned, remembering him dancing around the room, clutching his testicles and screaming. He'd had my wife, and as far as I knew now, it turns out he'd fucked me, too. He was still lucky I didn't have a .38 in there. When a man decides to make a cuckold out of another man, he better be ready to pay the bills. I arrived at the hospital around 8:30 p.m. and went to the emergency room. Damn vultures, they greeted my arrival with great pleasure and relief. I spent another 15 minutes filling out forms and confirming insurance. Why the hell is everything written in Spanish? This is the U.S. and we speak English here. At least it sounds like English. Finally, I was led to Karen. I was surprised at how pale she looked. She smiled weakly at me, then looked at her hands, fidgeting with her fingers. "Are you okay, Karen?" I asked. "Are you in a lot of pain?" "My head hurts, Tim, but the doctors are being cautious. They want to make sure there isn't a brain bleed or something." "I'm feeling better and better," Karen replied. "You didn't happen to bring me any clothes, did you?" she asked. "I'm going to be discharged soon." "No, Karen, I didn't bring anything. Can't you just wear what you were wearing when you came here?" I asked rather cruelly. "Where are your clothes?" I wasn't wearing any clothes. I must have fallen and hit my head in the shower. The last thing I remember, I was getting ready to take a bath. Then they loaded me into the ambulance. I wasn't wearing any clothes," she screamed. It was very embarrassing. "I bet it was," I agreed. "What the hell happened to Carson's car? Why is it parked in our driveway? And where's yours? Why is our bedroom all trashed? What happened to Carson?" "I can't remember anything, Tim. Please don't ask me any more questions," Karen begged. "I have a headache and I'm nauseous." Me too, I agreed when my irritation with her became almost obvious. "Why don't you just get some rest? I'll be waiting to take you home when the doctors say you can leave." With those words, I turned around and went looking for Dottie. I found her in the intensive care unit. When I approached her, she smiled grimly at me. "He's feeling much better, Tim. They had to remove his left testicle, but he's resting comfortably now. They said if he makes it through the night without further complications, he'll be moved to a regular room in the morning," Dottie whispered. "Jesus, he lost a nut!" I blurted out. "How did that happen?" "We couldn't get any reasonable explanation from Carson or Karen," Dottie replied. "I got a call from some man who said he was your neighbor and that someone had wrecked Carson's car in the driveway. I tried to call Karen, but there was no answer, so I left a quick message and drove to your house. When I got there, Carson was in his car. A passing motorist stopped and tried to help. He told me that Carson was running around the car naked and screaming. He then jumped in the car and said he was going to the hospital. The guy took the keys from him. He was very apologetic, but said he was afraid Carson was on drugs or drunk. He knew Carson couldn't drive with a flat tire," Dottie continued. "I think he may have cut his scrotum on the glass in the seat. He was bleeding from several places on his back and buttocks," Dottie said. "We called an ambulance on our cell phone. Then I heard the guy who had stopped to help Carson swear. I looked up and saw Karen staggering naked down the driveway." "What the hell happened?" I asked. "Did Karen say anything?" "Nothing that makes sense, Tim," Karen replied. She was holding her head and moaning. I made her sit up and felt a big bump on her head. "I've been with Carson most of the time since we got here. Have you talked to Karen?" I told her Karen couldn't remember much of anything. We went to get coffee and talked some more while we waited for the news. Carson said that he and Karen had gone to a sushi bar for lunch, and he thought they must have been given bad seafood or someone had put some kind of drug in it, Dottie told me. "I've had a few meals that didn't go well for me, but I've never lost my memory or my testicle from it, Dottie," I stated. "Did he, what, say his car crashed and Karen hit her head because of the sushi or something?" "I think that sounds kind of shitty, too." "No pun intended," Dottie smiled weakly. "It's only almost plausible because I can't think of a better explanation. Their behavior was rather odd. Maybe Carson crashed his car while in some kind of trance or something. It could well be," I agreed. I was beginning to worry about my involvement in some serious shit. If Carson took the blame, it would help me avoid any legal repercussions. I acted furious, and I won't regret it, especially if I get away with it. "Be sure to report it to the police if they ask," I advised. "I don't think there's a law against wrecking your own car," We talked for about an hour. Then, around 10 o'clock, I was notified that Karen was to be kept overnight for observation. I said goodnight to Dottie and left. I felt sorry for her. She didn't deserve to be in the situation she was in, but neither did I. Well, maybe a little. I shot Carson's left nut. I couldn't sleep, so I finished repairing the drain and put the tools away. I took the drill, shotgun, and hammer and threw them into the Delaware River like a thug from a dime novel. I didn't hear any questions from the cops, but I did it as if I had heard. Then I cleaned up our bedroom and changed the linens on the bed. Finally, I made the bed in the spare room and went to sleep there. I was still asleep when the phone rang at 9 a.m. It was Karen. "Tim, I can come home," she told me. "Will you pick me up? Get me some clothes, please?" I brought her home and helped her into the bedroom. She still couldn't walk very well. I put her in her pajamas and put her to bed. She slept most of the day. Dottie called around noon and said Carson was going to be okay. He would be discharged in a couple days. I thought about it and realized I didn't care if he recovered or bought the ranch. He was a total asshole. After I hung up, Karen called me. "How's Carson? What happened to him?" she asked. "No one seems to know what the hell happened, Karen," I replied. "Carson is going to recover, but from now on, he's going to be one ball short of a full set." I watched her to see how the news would affect her. She just closed her eyes and sobbed a little. Then she fell asleep. Later that night, I made soup and fed it to Karen. Her color got much better, and she talked a lot more. But that wasn't the point. Essentially, she never said anything. Nothing was said about how she and Carson had screwed up so badly. "Are you going to bed soon, Tim?" He smiled. "I miss you." I still had the image of them sleeping together in my head, and her words echoed in my ears as she told him he could do whatever he wanted to her. I knew it was unlikely that I would ever sleep in our bedroom or with her again. "No, I'm going to watch TV," I told her. "Get some sleep. You'll feel better tomorrow." I turned off the light, went to the spare bedroom, and fell asleep. When I woke up, the sun was up and Karen was standing next to my bed. She seemed to be on the mend pretty well by now. "Why were you sleeping here, Tim?" she asked. "I wanted you to sleep with me." "I think I'll sleep here for a few nights, Karen. You need to get your strength and memory back," I replied. "I don't want to tire you out." Karen looked at me sadly and left the room. I didn't even have the courage to look at her or talk to her. I think she sensed it somehow. As it turned out, the cops concluded that Carson had lost his mind and crashed his own car. He didn't try to make them believe otherwise. I figured he realized that he would expose himself if he tried to object, and the affair with Karen would become obvious. He felt it would be less painful to let people think he'd had a breakdown or that he'd eaten some crappy sushi. Karen had no desire to visit sick Carson and try to cheer him up, so I stopped at his house about a day after he returned there from the hospital. He was in bed, and Dottie accompanied me to him. "Hi, Carson," I grinned. "You need to hurry up and come to your senses so I can kick your ass at golf." He stared at me for quite a while. I knew he was trying to read my face to see if I had anything to do with the hell he was going through. I just stared at him, not even blinking. "Sure, Tim," he finally said. "Whatever you want." It was obvious he'd lost his swagger and confidence. I realized that losing a nut makes a man nervous. He becomes more cautious and reasonable. Karen didn't come into work until Tuesday. I dropped her off because her car was still parked there. She didn't try to explain to me at all how it happened when she was home, and must have noticed that I didn't bother to ask again after that first night in the hospital. I was trying to decide if I had overreacted then, and if I should try to make things right with Karen. I had put a lot of time and effort into her. I thought we had a good marriage, right up until the day Carson slept with her in our bed. Mistakes happen, and many marriages have fallen on hard times. The next day after work, we were sitting at the kitchen table. I was going through the mail when I saw a letter from the hospital. In a nutshell, it said that Karen had gonorrhea and I should see a doctor and get tested, and she should start treatment immediately. I read it twice and handed the letter to Karen. I realized I shouldn't be surprised. Carson had made statements over the years about his tastes in women and his attraction to them. I had thought at the time that they were just talk. Now I realized he was telling the truth. He was a real shit. Then I smiled to myself, remembering that he was a one-nut crazy shit. Meanwhile, Karen was digesting the information from the letter. I could almost read her mind. Was there any chance that I was the one who had caught the disease and passed it on to her? Or at least that I had cheated on her and didn't know I had infected her? If I was infected, she could accuse me of being the one who passed the infection to her. The joker in this deck was that I was never even close to cheating. And if I did, it was from a loving, faithful wife. "Well, it looks like you brought home more than you planned from one trip," she grinned. "No wonder you slept in the spare bedroom." After that cheeky request, my mind was made up. She wanted me to get infected so she could win the game. It didn't seem to occur to her that I may have been faithful to her. We all tend to attribute our character traits and logic to others. If we steal, we believe others steal. It's the same with cheating. Saturday morning, I threw my negative test on the kitchen table in front of Karen. As she read the report, her hand shook. Then I tossed her another paper. It stated that I had filed for divorce. For the first time in a long time, Karen showed some normal emotion, begging me to reconsider my decision. She told me that she had fallen victim to Carson's seductive charms, but that she loved me. Only me. My cell phone rang and I answered it. Karen stopped yelling as I spoke. It was Dottie. "Tim, I got the report from the hospital the other day about why Tim lost a testicle. Well, other things. I tested positive for gonorrhea. Did you too?" she asked. "What about Karen?" I thought for a moment and decided that Dottie had a right to know. "No, Dottie, I haven't, but Karen does. What an incredible coincidence, isn't it?" I asked, answering her question. "Yes, bloody incredible, Tim," Dottie said. "I'm already in treatment and I've decided to get something over with. I'm divorcing that one-nut bastard. By the way, Tim, do you happen to have a shotgun?" "I've got some packing to do, Dottie. Good luck to you," I said, hanging up the phone.